Happy Father's Day. This Father's Day, if we are to stay faithful to this gospel, it's not going to be so much a feel-good Father's Day. At least here it's not. Because this Father's Day in this gospel, the cross, is just too big to ignore. Truth is, if we are honest, there is no such thing as a feel-good Father's Day. Because there's no such thing as fatherhood without that cross. There's also no such thing as feel-good Christianity, just feel-good Christianity. Christianity without the cross is very tempting. You get a nice group of people to pray with. You get the calm and peace of a liturgy, the occasional good homily. And church becomes like a good club where the dues are voluntary. That's the part I hate. And there's no such thing as feel-good Catholicism either, though that is equally tempting. We're blessed with a visual reminder, we Catholics, every time we gather, that there's no such thing as just Catholicism without a cross. Because that large crucifix that hangs by this altar and in the altar of every Catholic church in the world, every time we gather, we see that. And it's a visual reminder that it's not real to imagine anything different than that. That large crucifix by this altar preaches better than any homily any preacher could ever give. There's also no such thing as feel-good religion. That's not what Jesus died for. I don't know if you've ever had the occasion to be in a Protestant church of any sort over your years. They mostly all have crosses, but theirs don't look like ours. They only have a body suspended there. Sometimes they have no body suspended there, and if they do have a body actually suspended there, it is the risen and glorified body on that cross. There is no image of suffering Christ that I have ever seen, ever, in all the years I've been in and out of Protestant churches. Catholic churches, on the other hand, refuse to let us ignore that suffering is part of the gospel, that suffering is part of the Christian life, that suffering is part of life itself, and that there's no love without some suffering. And Catholicism refuses to let us imagine resurrection without beginning with some sort of suffering. That there's no resurrection without some suffering, some letting go, some loss, ever. Ever. And that's just real. And here in this chapel, in any Catholic church you go in, anywhere in the world, the cross is just too big to ignore. There is no such thing as crossless Christianity. There is no such thing as crossless Christianity. That's the message of the readings you just heard proclaimed this morning. The cross looms large in our readings today, and we cannot ignore it for any occasion, including Father's Day. The gospel this morning has two things to say about crossless Christianity, really. The first comes when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And they call out all the answers first that are just flattering. Oh, you're John the Baptist. Oh, you're Elijah the prophet. Or you're one of the other ancient prophets of Israel raised from the dead. And while all those things, all those names, all those titles, all those ways they saw him were quite flattering, they were all wrong. Christian faith is not easy sometimes, and sometimes it's very difficult. The second message of that same gospel becomes even tougher. We don't just look at that cross when we come in here. We carry that cross. He's telling us that we also have a cross to carry. Perhaps that question, who do you say I am, is only finished really when we can say, you're somebody who suffers for me. What will that cross be for us? Jesus gives us a hint, at least, when he calls his followers to pick up his cross every day. Our cross, it seems, won't usually be very dramatic like his is. Our cross isn't likely to be a great moment of great pain, but most likely, for most of us at least, it's going to be an everyday thing. The cross we pick up is simply the tough side of life, you know? It's, for being a dad, real. It's also real for anybody who's married, for any priest, for any single person, for any of us in any of our jobs. It's a thing nobody can avoid, really, this cross, this tough side of life, which the Christian can embrace, say yes to. Things that are part and parcel of an imperfect world, but for you and me become the raw material of our holiness. Certainly a minority of us have crosses that would fit on Calvary. Some do face great troubles, terrible sufferings, awful losses. But for most of us, picking up the cross means accepting life's everyday trials, disappointments, and difficulties, day in and day out. In other words, while some endure the pain of being nailed to a cross, for many people, picking up the cross means living with the splinters. Smaller hurts that are still quite painful. I got a splinter the other day. Ugh. I mean, I can't even believe how much those little things hurt. And it doesn't stop. And when you go digging around to take it out, it's even worse. So dads, on this Father's Day, I got to ask you, these days, as a dad, are you doing some heavy lifting? Or is it the splinters that are getting to you? I asked a dad recently, what's the hardest thing for him about being a dad these days? He said, I think it's really that I seem to have lost myself in raising my kids. My old hobbies, the things I used to enjoy, I just don't have the time or the energy to do anymore. I'm tired. And I miss all that. I really miss it. And on some days I miss it more than others. I asked another dad in our community who has little kids, what's the hardest thing for him about being a dad? He said, my biggest suffering, I think, is that I can't fix it. I'm somebody who wants to fix it, you know? I've always, it seems, been able to fix most things, but it hurts me to see my kids hurting and I can't fix it. They make destructive choices, I can't fix it. I can't fix this. And it's a helpless feeling. I don't know a dad who does not suffer being a dad. I don't know a dad who has not suffered being a dad. Nor do you. Come to think of it, I don't know a mom who doesn't suffer being a mom, or a priest, or any married couple, or really any human being for that matter. But I got to tell you, what defines us is not the cross we carry, but it's how we carry that cross. Just recently, a young professional athlete gave us a really good example, I think, of what it means to pick up an ordinary cross with extraordinary grace. And that's what these readings are about. Learning how to pick up ordinary crosses with extraordinary grace. Armando Galarraga is a 28-year-old pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. From what I can gather, he's not exactly a star pitcher. And he hasn't played very long in the major leagues, but on the 2nd of June, he pitched a perfect game. Now, for those of you who aren't baseball fans, that's a game where no opposing players get on base. In other words, no walks, no hits, every batter out. It only happened 20 times in 110 years. But in the 9th inning, Armando Galarraga was on his way to the record books with just one more out to go. The batter hits the ball, the first baseman fields it, he throws it to the pitcher, he beats the batter to first base, batter out. A perfect game. Except the umpire blows the call. He calls the runner safe. Now even Gary Braun can understand Galarraga's disappointment. I mean, I can't throw a baseball to that balcony from here. But it belongs in a category all by itself, this kind of a cross, and I would call it crushing disappointment. And even that doesn't come close to describing what I would imagine that would have felt like for him. I just watched it again last night on YouTube before I went to bed, and it's a remarkable moment. But it's what happens next. It's what happens next that makes Armando our guest preacher here in this chapel this morning. As Peggy Noonan writes about it, it's what follows the umpire's blunder that makes the story a great story. When Galarraga hears the call, she writes, he looks puzzled, surprised. But he's composed, and he actually smiles as if accepting fate. Others are running to the ump, and they're yelling at him at the top of their voices. But Galarraga just walks back to the mound to finish the job, which he does, grounding out the next batter. After the game, that pitcher praised that disgraced umpire for his immediate apology. He tells reporters he feels worse for the umpire than he does for himself. It's the ability to pick up ordinary crosses, you see, with extraordinary grace that defines us. That story is today's gospel in action. Armando Galarraga chose understanding over anger. He picked up the cross. He chose the humble path. He denied himself that glory and that victory. He took the high road, and that's the way of the cross. We don't need to be rocket scientists to figure out that this pitcher's place in history books will be better than if he had pitched a perfect game. His story will be told for a long time after those perfect games are long forgotten. And it's being told right here, right now, in this chapel, again, to prove it. The lesson he taught isn't complicated. Accept what happens. Don't whine, don't shout, don't give up, don't go to your own little pity party, don't be crabby for the rest of the day, don't make everybody else pay for the suffering you just experienced. And allow God's love to help carry that cross with you, because in the end, it's not the cross that you will be remembered for. It's the grace with which you carried your cross that you will be remembered for. Whether that cross requires heavy lifting or it's one of those everyday splinters, in the end, it won't be the cross you will be remembered for, but the grace with which you carried it. We have confidence in the words of Jesus at the end of that gospel text, and this is our confidence to be able to carry a cross with grace. By saving our life, he says, we will lose it. But by losing it for the sake of love, we'd save it. So there's no such thing, really, as a crossless Father's Day. As a matter of fact, there's no such thing as a crossless life. Dads, if you ever have the courage Jesus had to ask your kids, who do you say that I am? Be ready for a little flattery at first. I hope. But in the end, what I hope they see in you is what Peter saw in Jesus. A Messiah, in a sense that you taught us how to carry a cross with great grace. So dads, on this Father's Day morning, we have a gift for you, but it's not very glamorous. And it won't fit in your tie drawer. But it's that cross over there. As Christians, we can never take our eyes off the cross. If we do, we're done for.